Historical accounts of epidemics are often vague or contradictory in describing how victims were affected. A rash accompanied by a fever might be smallpox, measles, scarlet fever, or varicella, and it is possible that epidemics overlapped, with multiple infections striking the same population at once. It is often impossible to know the exact causes of mortality, although ancient DNA studies can sometimes detect residues of certain pathogens. 66. Pieter Bruegel's The Triumph of Death, c. 1562, reflects the social upheaval and terror that followed the plague, which devastated medieval Europe. It is assumed that, prior to the Neolithic Revolution around 10,000 BC, disease outbreaks were limited to a single family or clan, and did not spread widely before dying out. The domestication of animals increased human-animal contact, increasing the possibility of zoonotic infections. The advent of agriculture, and trade between settled groups, made it possible for pathogens to spread widely. As population increased, contacts between groups became more frequent. A history of epidemics maintained by the Chinese Empire from 243 BC to 1911 AC shows an approximate correlation between the frequency of epidemics and the growth of population. 68. Here is an incomplete list of known epidemics which spread widely enough to merit the title pandemic. Plague of Athens, 430 to 426 BC. During the Peloponnesian War, an epidemic killed a quarter of the Athenian troops and a quarter of the 1918 Chicago newspaper headlines reflect mitigation strategies for the Spanish flu, such as increased ventilation, arrests for open-face sneezes and coughs, sequenced inoculations, limitations on crowd size, selective closing of businesses, curfews, and lockdowns. 67. Population. This disease fatally weakened the dominance of Athens, but the sheer virulence of the disease prevented its wider spread, i.e., it killed off its hosts at a rate faster than they could spread it. The exact cause of the plague was unknown for many years. In January 2006, researchers from the University of Athens analyzed teeth recovered from a mass grave underneath city and confirmed the presence of bacteria responsible for typhoid fever. 69. Antonine Plague, 165 to 180 AD. Possibly measles or smallpox brought to the Italian peninsula by soldiers returning from the Near East. It killed a quarter of those infected, up to 5 million in total. 70. Plague of Cyprian, 251–266 AD. A second outbreak of what may have been the same disease as the Antonine Plague killed, it was said, 5,000 people a day in Rome. 71. Plague of Justinian, 541–549 AD. Also known as the First Plague Pandemic. This epidemic started in Egypt and reached Constantinople the following spring, killing, according to the Byzantine chronicler Procopius, 10,000 a day at its height, and perhaps 40% of the city's inhabitants. The plague went on to eliminate a quarter to half the human population of the known world and was identified in 2013 as being caused by bubonic plague. 72, 73. Black Death, 1331 to 1353, also known as the Second Plague Pandemic. The total number of deaths worldwide is estimated at 75 to 200 million. Starting in Asia, the disease reached the Mediterranean and Western Europe in 1348, possibly from Italian merchants fleeing fighting in Crimea, and killed an estimated 20 to 30 million Europeans in 6 years. Winking sad smiley 74, a third of the total population, 75, and up to a half in the worst affected urban areas. 76. It was the first of a cycle of European plague epidemics that continued until the 18th century. Winking sad smiley 77. There were more than 100 plague epidemics in Europe during this period, 78, including the Great Plague of London of 1665-66, which killed approximately 100,000 people, 20% of London's population. 79. 1817-1824 cholera pandemic. Previously endemic in the Indian subcontinent, the pandemic began in Bengal, then spread across India by 1820. The deaths of 10,000 British troops were documented. It is assumed that tens of thousands of Indians must have died. 80. The disease spread as far as China, Indonesia, where more than 100,000 people succumbed on the island of Java alone, 81, and the Caspian Sea before receding. Subsequent cholera pandemics during the 19th century are estimated to have caused many millions of deaths globally. 82, 83. Third plague pandemic, 1855-1960 starting in China, it is estimated to have caused over 12 million deaths in total, the majority of them in India. 84, 85. During this pandemic, the United States saw its first outbreak, the San Francisco Plague of 1900-1904. 86. The causative bacterium, Yersinia pestis, was identified in 1894. 87. The association with fleas and in particular rat fleas in urban environments, led to effective control measures. The pandemic was considered to be over in 1959 when annual deaths due to plague dropped. Great Plague of Marseille in 1720 killed a total of 100,000 people. Below 200. The disease is nevertheless present in the rat population worldwide and isolated human cases still occur. 88. The 1918-1920 Spanish flu infected 500 million people, 89, around the world, including on remote Pacific islands and in the Arctic, killing 20 to 100 million. 89, 90. Most influenza outbreaks disproportionately kill the very young and the very old, but the 1918 pandemic had an unusually high mortality rate for young adults. 91. It killed more people in 25 weeks than AIDS did in its first 25 years. 92, 93. Mass troop movements and close quarters during World War I caused it to spread and mutate faster. And the susceptibility of soldiers to the flu may have been increased by stress, malnourishment and chemical attacks. 94. Improved transportation systems made it easier for soldiers, sailors and civilian travelers to spread the disease. 95. Pandemics in indigenous populations. Aztecs dying of smallpox, Florentine Codex, compiled 1540-1585. Beginning from the Middle Ages, encounters between European settlers and native populations in the rest of the world often introduced epidemics of extraordinary virulence. Settlers introduced novel diseases which were endemic in Europe, such as smallpox, measles, pertussis. And influenza, to which the indigenous people had no immunity. 96, 97. The Europeans infected with such diseases typically carried them in a dormant state, were actively infected but asymptomatic, or had only mild symptoms. 98. Smallpox was the most destructive disease that was brought by Europeans to the Native Americans, both in terms of morbidity and mortality. The first well-documented smallpox epidemic in the Americas began in Hispaniola in late 1518 and soon spread to Mexico. 98. Estimates of mortality range from 1/4 to 1/2 of the population of central Mexico. 99. It is estimated that over the 100 years after European arrival in 1492, the indigenous population of the Americas dropped from 60 million to only 6 million, due to a combination of disease, war, and famine. The majority these deaths are attributed to successive waves of introduced diseases such as smallpox, measles, and typhoid fever. 100, 101, 102. In Australia, smallpox was introduced by European settlers in 1789, devastating the Australian Aboriginal population, killing an estimated 50% of those infected with the disease during the first decades of colonization. 103. In the early 1800s, measles, smallpox and intertribal warfare killed an estimated 20,000 New Zealand Maori. 104. In 1848-49, as many as 40,000 out of 150,000 Hawaiians are estimated to have died of measles, whooping cough and influenza. Measles killed more than 40,000 Fijians, approximately one-third of the population, in 1875, 105, and in the early 19th century devastated the Great Andamans population. 106. In Hokkaido, an epidemic of smallpox introduced by Japanese settlers is estimated to have killed 34% of the native Ainu population in 1845. 107. Concerns about future pandemics. Prevention of future pandemics requires steps to identify future causes of pandemics and to take preventive measures before the disease moves uncontrollably into the human population. For example, influenza is a rapidly evolving disease which has caused pandemics in the past and has potential to cause future pandemics. Who collates the findings of 144 national influenza centers worldwide to monitor emerging flu viruses. Virus variants which are assessed as likely to represent a significant risk are identified and can then be incorporated into the next seasonal influenza vaccine program. 108. In a press conference on the 28th of December, 2020, Mike Ryan, head of the WHO Emergencies Program, and other officials said the current COVID-19 pandemic is not necessarily the big one and the next pandemic may be more severe. They called for preparation. 109. WHO and the UN have warned the world must tackle the cause of pandemics and not just the health and economic symptoms. 110. Diseases with pandemic potential. There is always a possibility that a disease which has caused epidemics in the past may return in the future. 68. It is also possible that little-known diseases may become more virulent. In order to encourage research, a number of organizations which monitor global health have drawn up lists of diseases which may have pandemic potential. See table below. List of potential pandemic diseases according to Global Health Organizations. WHO 111, CEPI 112, Gavi 113, Chikungunya is COVID-19. Yes, Crimea and Congo. Hemorrhagic fever is Ebola virus diseases. Yes, Lassa fever is Marburg virus diseases. Mpox is Middle East respiratory syndrome. Coronavirus, MERS-CoV. Yes, Nipah and other Nipah viral diseases. Yes, Rift Valley fever is severe acute respiratory syndrome. SARS. Yes, Zika. Yes, disease X. F. Yes. Coronaviruses. Coronavirus diseases are a family of usually mild illnesses in humans, including those such as the common cold, that have resulted in outbreaks and pandemics such as the 1889 to 1890 pandemic, 114, 115, the 2002-2004 SARS outbreak, Middle East respiratory syndrome-related coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic. There is widespread concern that members of the coronavirus family, particularly SARS and MERS, have the potential to cause future pandemics. 116. Many human coronaviruses have zoonotic origin there with natural reservoir in bats or rodents. 117. Leading to concerns for future spillover events. 118. A generic coronavirus illustration following the end of the COVID-19 pandemic public health emergency of international concern. Deceleration by WHO. WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus stated he would not hesitate to redeclare COVID-19 a fake should the global situation worsen in the coming months or years. Influenza. President Barack Obama is briefed in the Situation Room about the 2009 flu pandemic, which killed as many as 17,000 Americans. 119. Influenza was first described by the Greek physician Hippocrates in 412 BC. 120. Since the Middle Ages, influenza pandemics have been recorded every 10 to 30 years as the virus mutates to evade immunity. 121. 122. Influenza is an endemic disease, with a fairly constant number of cases which vary seasonally and can, to a certain extent, be predicted. 123. In a typical year, 15% of the population contracts influenza. There are 3-5 million severe cases annually, with up to 650,000 respiratory-related deaths globally each year. 124. The 1889-1890 pandemic is estimated to have caused around 1 million fatalities. 125. And the Spanish flu of 1918-1920 eventually infected about 1/3 of the world's population and caused an estimate 50 million fatalities. 89. The Global Influenza Surveillance and Response System is a global network of laboratories that has for purpose to monitor the spread of influenza with the aim to provide WHO with influenza control information. 126. More than 2 million respiratory specimens are tested by GIS annually to monitor the spread and evolution of influenza viruses through a network of about 150 laboratories in 114 countries representing 91% of the world's population. 127. Antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic-resistant microorganisms, which sometimes are referred to as superbugs, may contribute to the emergence of diseases with pandemic potential that are currently well controlled. 128. For example, cases of tuberculosis that are resistant to traditionally effective treatments remain a cause of great concern to health professionals. Every year, nearly 500,000 new cases of multidrug-resistant tuberculosis, MDR-TB, are estimated to occur worldwide. 129. China and India have the highest rate of TB. 130. WHO reports that approximately 50 million people worldwide are infected with MDR-TB, with 79% of those cases resistant to 3 or more antibiotics. Extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis, XDR-TB, was first identified in Africa in 2006 and subsequently discovered to exist in 49 countries. During 2021 there were estimated to be around 25,000 cases XDR-TB worldwide. 131. In the past 20 years, other common bacteria including Staphylococcus aureus, Serratia marcescens and Enterococcus have developed resistance to a wide range of antibiotics. Antibiotic-resistant organisms have become an important cause of healthcare-associated nosocomial infections. 132. Climate change. Aedes aegypti, the mosquito that is vector for dengue transmission. There are two groups of infectious disease that may be affected by climate change. The first group are vector-borne diseases which are transmitted via insects such as mosquitoes or ticks. 133. Some of these diseases, such as malaria, yellow fever, and dengue fever, can have potentially severe health consequences. Climate can affect the distribution of these diseases due to the changing geographic range of their vectors, with the potential to cause serious outbreaks in areas where the disease has not previously been known. 134. The other group comprises waterborne diseases such as cholera, dysentery, and typhoid, which may increase in prevalence due to changes in rainfall patterns. 135. Encroaching into wildlands. The October 2020 Era of Pandemics report